We are recording the interview of Larry Bade. This interview is being conducted by Jeremy Tack and Rob Drum from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 9:25 a.m. on March 9th, 2018. Larry, welcome. Thank you for doing this interview. Let's start off with where and when were you born?
I was born in Flint, Michigan, 2nd of May, 1965.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My dad, Larry Bade Sr., kind of a blue-collar guy. He's worked in the automotive industry early on in his life, became a shop foreman at a factory, and ran a body shop. He worked for Lincoln Mercury Ford, fixing up cars for a number of years, and finally he put together ball screws at a company in Detroit before he retired in 2015. Yeah. And my mom is Bonnie Bade, and she's just been a homemaker, helped raise 7 kids, and she's still alive and living in Port Huron, Michigan right now.
Do you have any siblings?
7 of them, yeah. Well, 7 of us all together. I have 2 brothers and 4 sisters. I'm the oldest.
Oh, really? Okay. Do you have any other family members that served in the military?
Long history of folks in the military on both sides, my mom and dad's family. My Uncle Butch, he was a sniper in Vietnam, on my dad's side. And on my mom's side, my Uncle Jim served in the Korean War. My Uncle John did 30 years in the Army and served in Vietnam, and all my other uncles served in reserves or guard units.
All right. So when did you join the Air Force?
Well, I went in right after high school in 1984. In those days, the economy was not very good. People often complain nowadays about the economy being bad, or it's getting better, and they think it's really terrible. But trust me, in 1984, it was a lot worse. It was so bad that McDonald's had up on their, where you see billions and billions served or whatever, on that sign back in those days, it said, "We are not accepting applications at this time." So you can imagine a kid just getting out of high school with dreams of going to college and getting started in life. We didn't really have an option other than the military, at least in the town I grew up in. So went in 1984 right after high school, and my big thing was I wanted to get an education and see the world, and Uncle Sam delivered on all those. So
what did your parents think when you decided to join?
my mom was terrified. Grenada had just happened, and it was the first military conflict, serious military conflict that we'd been in since Vietnam. And then prior to that, the hostage situation in Iran was fresh on everybody's mind. And a lot of things like that were going on in the world, and it seemed like the world was really falling to pieces. Ronald Reagan, the president at that time, was doing an enormous buildup in the military, and of course, young folks nowadays won't really have a clue, but the Cold War was in full bloom, and nuclear missiles from all over the world pointing at each other, mutual annihilation kind of thing. All that was going on at the same time. So my mom was quite scared that I was going into a military service that would put me in harm's way. But that's what you do in the military, So.
So tell me about basic training. What was that like?
Yeah, well, much like in the movies. You get off the bus coming from San Antonio airport. They usually pick you up there, and you'll ride the bus with all the other recruits. You get to Lackland Air Force Base, which is still the Air Force's main training base for folks. And you get off the bus with your bag, and they have these little footprints all over the ground that are cocked at a 45-degree angle, and they tell you to stand on the footprints. Put your bags down, and then someone else comes out and yells at you and says, "Pick them up," and you're holding your bag standing on these little footprints, and they're yelling again, "Put them down, pick them up, put them down." So from the very very onset, they sort of drive the concept of teamwork into you until everybody picks their bags up at exactly the same time and puts them down, so that it makes one continuous boom, boom, instead of 100 blah, 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 blah. And basic training for me was relatively easy because I've always been a detail-oriented person, and in the Air Force, that's, at least at that time, that was the primary focus, was making sure you could pay attention to details. And I think that's probably true even today. You have to have a mindset of being able to take care of all the little details and try to keep a million things on your mind at the same time, because if you don't, you could press the wrong button, or who knows. You know?
Is there any instructors in basic training that stand out to you or that you remember?
Sergeant Garza and Sergeant Williams. There was no military bases around where I grew up. All I could really gather from my uncles was just don't volunteer for anything. That was their big thing. And so I get to basic training, and I'm like with everybody else. I've been up almost 20 hours already between plane rides, bus rides, to pick it up, put it down. You're pretty much exhausted, and sometimes you get the tired sillies at that point in time. I don't know if you've ever had that, but it happens to folks when they get overly tired. And I remember Sergeant Garza, because she was a short Hispanic lady. She couldn't have been 5'2", and she had that big, round Smokey the Bear hat on. And she started yelling at me, and her little hat was poking off my chest right about here. And I just thought that was funny, and I started laughing. Everyone else was terrified, but I just thought it was funny, and I started snickering. And she just lost her mind. She stepped back and looked at me and goes, "Oh, you think that's funny, huh?" And she yelled, "Sergeant Williams, we got us a joker here. He thinks everything's funny." So, you know, in those days, the building quarters for the trainees was actually lifted up off the ground, a whole floor. And the barracks there, they kind of made a noise if someone heavy was walking across the floor. And I noticed that the floor was kind of making that noise, and it seemed like Godzilla was on his way. And there was Sergeant Williams. Sergeant Williams was about 6'5" and probably close to 270 pounds, and ripped to shreds. And he towered over me and put that Smokey the Bear in my forehead as he was looking down at me. And I decided at that time that it wasn't funny anymore. This was pretty serious. So he grabbed me by my shirt collar, lifted me up, and pushed me against the locker and said, "Sergeant Garza says you got something funny to tell me." And all I could say was, "No, sir." He put me back down, no harm done, but quick lesson in life. You take things like that very seriously, and it sort of set the tone for basic training for me. And everything else after that was all about business, you know.
What was the feeling like when you completed basic training?
It's terrific. There are very few feelings that are so elating. There's a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pride that kind of just envelops you when you graduate basic training. You get to wear your Class A uniform. You know, we call them the blues, and you look sharp. You feel good. You see all the other recruits that maybe aren't as far along as training, and you think, "Yeah, I know what they're going to go through." But along the way, your flight, the Army would call them a platoon. I'm not sure what they call them in the Navy.
Division.
A division. You get real close with them folks, and you learn how to work together and become a strong team. And those last days of basic training, you feel great. You get to go downtown on a town pass. And San Antonio is a beautiful place if you've never been there. And you just have this sense of accomplishment about what you've done, and it just feels really good. For a lot of young people, that may be the first time in their entire lives they've done something on such a grand scale, you know. So for me, it was a good experience, and I wouldn't take back anything at all.
So what was the next step after basic training?
Well, after basic training, I drove literally across the Air Force Base to the other side of the Lackland Air Force Base to the Security Police at that time. It's now called Security Forces, but it was called Security Police Training Center over there, where I went through 8 weeks of security police training that taught you how to do security and police work, primarily focusing on police and security stuff related to guarding nuclear weapons. Again, the Cold War was going on. That was a big thing at the time. And the police work was something I became a lot better at many years later. And but it was fun. It was very physically taxing. Those kind of units require you to be able to deploy anywhere in the world at a moment's notice. And years later, probably 4 or 5 years later, as Ronald Reagan's military buildup was reaching fruition, the whole concept of being able to deploy anywhere in the world anytime at a moment's notice became really kind of a buzz in all the military services. And that's kind of the direction that the security police units were training at that time, was to make you deployable anywhere in the world. And as a reference, the security police units in those days were kind of the infantry of the Air Force, if you will. Per an agreement with the Army would take care of the extreme perimeter of any forward Air Force bases, and then security police would come in and they would defend the perimeter around the runways and stuff, and keep all the bad guys from getting to our aircraft and people and resources that were located on the base. Had a special assignment that I'm really proud of, and you don't hear much about it. In fact, the Air Force Museum has one single little missile and display that represents it, but it was the Ground Launch Cruise Missile Program, or GLICM is what we called it. And those were medium-range nuclear ballistic missiles that we would literally drive out into the countryside anywhere in Europe and hide and wait for someone to, raise the flag and say, okay, launch your missiles. And our job was to protect those, and it was another level of field craft that most folks never get unless you're in special forces or something like that. And we were able to hide 400 people and 16 nuclear missiles so well that we would literally get herds of goats and cattle caught in our camouflage netting, and they didn't know we were there. So that was a lot of fun. But anyways, I digress from your question. The place I went after basic training was the security police training area across from Lackland. And after that, I went on to some more fieldcraft training at Camp Bullis, Texas, which was an old Army camp from World War II that they had converted into a field training unit, we'll call it that. And it was really old. The hooches were made out of plywood. They had metal roofs on them. There was no electricity or air conditioning. You literally lived in the field for 6 weeks. And then after that, I went to my first assignment, which was Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Michigan, near Alpena, Michigan. It's closed now. It was a B-52 bomber base with nuclear missiles on alert. And after that, I went to the 47th Missile Wing and did the GLICM thing. That was a lot of fun. Did that for a year in Sicily. And after that, I came back to the United States to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina, where we took care of, at that time, F-4s. And then shortly thereafter my arrival, they converted to the F-15 E models, which became very important during Desert Storm. After that, stayed there for a while, almost 4 years, and then went to Korea. Did a year in just outside of Seoul at Osan Air Base. I was a trainer over there at that time because of all the field experience that I had had from my previous training with the ground launch cruise missile systems. They wanted, the Air Force at that time for security police units was, or now it was called security forces. They changed the name at that time. Field work became really super important. The whole Air Expeditionary Forces thing was getting ready to pop off and come online after Desert Storm. They saw sort of a big need for that, I think, in that you just got to be able to go anywhere at any time at a moment's notice. And our political structure and things in the world had changed to a point where you sort of just had to be able to tell the wife, hey, I got to leave tomorrow and pick up your bags and go, and I don't know when I'll be back. I can't tell you where I'm going or what I'm going to be doing, but I'm sure it'll be fun and exciting, and I'll call you when I can or send you a letter. Now, of course, back then they didn't have the communication systems that they do now, where you can just pick up a cell phone and have a conversation with your wife while you're shooting bad guys. It wasn't like that at all. So after Seymour Johnson, I went to Korea, as I said, and then after Korea, I came back to Langley Air Force Base, before that I went to K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base in northern Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula. It was also a B-52 base. It didn't stay open long. I was only there for 2 years, and they closed that base because the Cold War was kind of winding down. After 88, 89, the Berlin Wall fell, and relationships between us and Russia sort of thawed a little bit. Reagan did a good job with that. And as a result of that, there's a kind of a drawdown in the military a little bit at that time. And they were closing bases left and right, especially nuclear bases. There just wasn't a huge need for that as the threat of nuclear confrontation kind of lessened a little bit. But, to anyone listening to this, don't be fooled. In 2018, we still have plenty of nukes, and we can, go to war in a minute if we had to. So that closed. Now, after K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base closed, they have a team that comes in and reassigns you to a new base. And they kind of sell it like, well, you get to pick your base. They call it a base of preference, a BOP. And it works based on your data rank. And so my data rank at that time wasn't super high. And so they said, well, we got two choices for you. You can go to North Dakota or South Dakota. It's your choice. You get to pick which one. And I remember thinking, I don't want to go to either of those places because, again, that would be missile duty. And if you've ever done or heard about missile duty, you're probably thinking, that doesn't sound like any fun. You pretty much live in a hole in the ground for weeks at a time. And you have to travel sometimes 100 miles or more to get to the missile silo that you're assigned to protect or whatever. And that just wasn't for me. So I did something that that no one else really thought to do, I guess. I took a special duty assignment in recruiting service. I thought, well, yeah, I can go out and recruit young people to join the military. Now, at this time, it was 1994, and the economy had really taken off. The whole trickle-down thing, well, it trickled down, and everybody was making lots of money. Kids were getting out of high school, making, $12, $15, $18 an hour right out of high school. And that was a pretty amazing thing, considering the way we started this interview. I told you that even McDonald's wasn't hiring when I joined up. So recruiting was tough. It was hard to convince kids that it was, smarter for them to go in the military than to get out of high school and make $18 an hour. I mean, think about it. Even today, $18 an hour is a lot of money. But I remember kids out in Wilmington, Ohio, out at the Airborne Express hub at that time. It was they called it the sort, and it was just all these packages would come in off these airborne aircraft, and they'd sort them out and send them on their way, kind of like a FedEx or some of these other delivery companies like that. And they could go out there and get hired on the spot and be working the next day making $15 an hour. You know, that's good money back in 1994. So recruiting was tough. It was really, really hard. And it was probably the hardest thing I'd ever done in the military to that point. And I mean, by that time, I'd been in Desert Storm, Just Cause, deployments to Honduras. I'd been shot at and people tried to blow me up and all kinds of things like that. But nothing was as hard as being in that recruiting service. You're never off. I mean, you're sitting in restaurants looking at the busboy thinking, I wonder if he's qualified. Let me talk to him. And you just never are able to shut it off. So it gets old after a while. 4 years in that business was really tough. But I managed and did well at it. And finished that 4-year special duty assignment and went to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. And at that time I was a E6, a tech sergeant, and got there and did really well for myself, I think. By the time I left Langley, I was a master sergeant, and I had traveled to other places. Enduring Freedom, the Twin Towers in 2000, of course, had happened, and 9/11, boy, that really sure changed a lot of stuff from a military perspective. The focus in my career field in military police units really became anti-terrorism at that point. And the deployment cycles increased from where military police units would normally do 30, 90, and 120-day rotations to different places. It became 180 days, short tours, year-long tours to different deployments all over. And then even within those deployments, you didn't sit still long. I'll tell you, when I went to Oman, we were at outside of Salalah, and one of the duties that we would do is aircraft would come in and they'd have equipment and supplies for frontline units. And the Air Force military police units were really good in convoys at that time. It's something that we had done out in the missile field for years. Convoying missiles and doing convoy security was just something that they were good at. So the Department of Defense thought, well, this is who will get to secure our convoys when we have to travel to different places. And we did. We sent convoys out to frontline military units, not only in the Air Force, but special ops units, Army units, Marine Corps units. Not too many Navy units. They sort of had their own supply system, but traveling with those convoys, if you watch movies, you see the IEDs that explode, and those were all over the place. And those guys could make improvised explosive devices out of bubble gum, I swear. So that was a bit hairy. That was a tough time, and constantly being in convoy units like that, you may land at Al-Kharj in Saudi Arabia. And they may reload stuff on C-130s in theater, or they're moving around to different places. And you'll travel with those aircraft and those supplies to other places, and then you'll offload, and then you'll grab Humvees or whatever other vehicles are available to you, and you'll convoy them out to other places. So it was constant moving all the time. You just never really had time to hang your head anywhere and sort of settle in. At least that was my experience in the units that I was with over there. It was tough. I saw a lot of bad things that happen to good people. But everybody pulled together, and we got the mission done, and it's still going on today. In Afghanistan and the Middle East, those operations are still happening. Don't hear about it as much. I guess the media's focus is on Donald Trump now, and they've forgotten all about the fact that we're still deployed to these places. So I retired from Langley Air Force Base in 2004, and one of my last assignments was getting to go back to Sicily to guard a SATCOM facility inside of, it was actually just outside of Sigonella Naval Air Station on the side of a mountain. And at that time, they were still catching satellite data from the Balkans and Kosovo and Serbia and those areas that they still were at the backside of their drawdown for their conflicts. And that was fun. So, you know, the Air Force, they travel in style. You know, we don't sleep in ditches, and most of our tents are air conditioned when we go places. I wasn't in a tent in Sicily. I was actually in a 4-star hotel. They provided a government vehicle for me and an unlimited amount of gas money, and paid me $110 a day to be a security supervisor for a missile or a satellite relay station. And so I got to travel all over the island of Sicily, and it was just a really, really nice time. Got to go back to the Comiso Air Station, which was the base that the Glickman units were assigned to. And it was a ghost town. There really wasn't much there. They'd closed it after the drawdown during the Cold War. And but it was neat to wander around there and you know, kind of feel the ghosts of the past sneaking up behind you, and a lot of fun. So also at Langley, I got to be in charge of General John Jumper's security staff. That was a different kind of animal there. I mean, security, whether it's guarding a general or guarding a nuke. You know, there's always potential threats that you're trying to avoid and keep your person or your resources safe. But it was really, really nice to be able to pick up a phone and call anybody, anywhere, and say, yeah, this is Sergeant Bade from General Jumper's office. I need, and people couldn't jump through hoops fast enough to get you what you needed. And that was the first time I'd ever experienced that kind of treatment before, and I really liked it. It was kind of spoiling, to be honest with you. Really enjoyed that a lot. But doing DV security, high-level 4-star general officers like John Jumper, you know, he was the chief of staff of the Air Force during his last assignment. And doing that kind of security is a little different. You have to deal with drivers. You have to deal with where they're going, what they're doing. And General Jumper, during the 3.5 years that I was with his security staff, the thing about him is he was really all about meshing with people from his counterparts in other parts of the world. So if there's a chief of staff of the Air Force in Mexico, he'd invite him to come to Langley Air Force Base. And we had his counterparts from all over the world, different countries of the world, come to Langley Air Force Base. And they would bring their security attachments with them. And I remember in particular one that was especially cool, the Israelis. They don't play. They're security guys. They come in with Uzis and guns in like every pocket of their trousers, and you're like, no, we got the security, and they were like, no, we got our security. We'll take care of our guy. You take care of your guy. And we're like, no, you're on an Air Force base. You really need to put those guns in the armory. You can't be taking those to Chick-fil-A with you, or people around here get a little nervous when they see machine guns hanging off of people's shoulders. But they weren't having none of that, you know. And it took a bit of persuading to get those guys to tone it down a notch or two. They were just, you know, I mean, for them it's just a way of life every day. And they're very professional, top-notch folks, all of them, every one of them. Yeah, I just can't say enough good things about them. They're really cool, but they came in and they were just ready to kick down the door if they needed to, and I liked them. And so that was a lot of fun, and I'm glad I got that experience to do that kind of work. So that's kind of my career in a nutshell. I mean, there's lots of little pockets of stories. In our career field, again, as I said, you kind of go everywhere all the time. You just sort of, it's Monday, you're back at your home base. On Tuesday, you're picking your bags up to go somewhere else, wherever they need you. So we call those temporary duty assignments, TDYs, and they still happen to this day. I've done TDYs all over the world. Some were 30 days, 90 days, 120 days. I got to go to Honduras in 1987. Can't talk much about that. A lot of it's still classified, but I got to work with the CIA. Those people aren't right in the head, but that's a whole different matter altogether. A lot of the stuff I can talk about, you can pick up a book and read about it, with the Iran-Contra affair and the arms that were being transported to El Salvador, and I probably should just stop there with that story. But Honduras was an interesting place. It's the first time I was ever in combat, and yeah, it's a scary feeling. Then another Just Cause. I wasn't there for Just Cause. I was there for a 90-day temporary duty assignment to Panama, the country of Panama, and it was supposed to be beautiful. Now I was at a fuel tank. They call it a tank farm. It's basically just fuel in these big tanks at Albrook Air Base, and so I'm there, and I'm out on my security detail. It's 1990. It was December. It wasn't too cold. At nighttime, it got a little chilly down there. And you can hear all the strange noises in the jungle, and all of a sudden we start to see flares coming out of aircraft. And the whole valley down, because Albrook's up on the side of a hill, the whole valley's kind of lighten up, and then you start to see red tracers going this way, and then green tracers going that way, and it's like back and forth. And I realize it's gunfire, but I'm like, I don't know what the heck's going on. And then we get the call on our little phone, our little field phone, and they said the 82nd Airborne Division is jumping in. If anyone lands by you, here's the challenge and reply passwords. And no one did by me, but it was like, oh, okay, I guess we're in a conflict now. So much for my sunny good time at Panama. 3 trips to the Middle East, all those were pretty much like you'd expect. Yeah, lots of schools. The Air Force is big on schools, and those are TDYs. Lots of schools. They're always teaching you something that's going to make you a better person, either a better manager, a better supervisor, a better marksman. One of the training areas that they developed in the Air Force, and I believe it's still in service today, was a place called Silver Flag Alpha, and it's about 50 miles from Las Vegas in the middle of the desert, but it's where the Air Force does all their desert warfare training, and all their heavy weapons schools are out there. That was fun, because the last day you get to go to Vegas, and that's a good time. Love Vegas. And what goes to Vegas stays in Vegas, right? So we won't talk anymore about Vegas. Got to see a lot of great places. Got to meet some really, really good people, both Americans and foreign nationals. Got to do a lot of exciting, cool things. I mean, I can't say enough cool things about being in the Air Force for almost 21 years. I don't think there's any experiences I would take back. Every one of them has a special place in my heart, and there's always the people. No matter what anyone tells you, it really is all about the people. You can talk about the stealth bomber or the Aurora project or anything else like that. You can talk about the hardware and how cool stuff is, but it really comes down to the people that you meet and work with every day. That's the heart and soul of the military. And every person along the way that I met has a special place in my heart too. And I think that any veteran would tell you the same thing. So, what else you got for me?
Well, what made you choose security forces or security police?
Well, I didn't really. Well, I kind of did. So the Air Force, their approach to assigning you your military occupation can happen before you leave for basic training as part of the recruiting process. Or in the Air Force, they can put you in a generalized field of study. Like they can say, okay, you're going to go into a mechanical field or an electronics field, an administrative field, or in my case, what they call a general aptitude field, which would cover most of your service industries, like anything medical, fire, police, contracting, things like that. So when I got to basic training, I was in this general aptitude field. And the job counselors come in, I think, on your third day in basic training, and they sit down with you and they say, well, you know, what would you like to do? And so I didn't really have a clue. I was fresh out of high school. I was just happy to have a job, you know, any job. And he said, well, here's what we got available for. We got security police and x-ray technician. He said, those are the two fields that are in our area that we can slot you into. And so you'll go directly to those schools as soon as you finish basic training. So I thought about it a little bit, and I'm like, police, yeah, I could do that. I could do that. That sounds like fun. And oddly enough, I'm still a police officer to this day. When I retired from the military, I became a corrections officer and then got a job as a police sergeant working at Dayton International Airport. So it turned out it worked out good for me. I earned a couple of degrees in criminal justice, and it was the right choice at the time. But you can't help but wonder, had I decided to become an x-ray technician, how much different my life might have been, you know. So that's how I made the choice, and it was the right choice. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I liked it a lot.
Tell me more about the Glickum, being in that unit and doing that.
Well, ground launch cruise missiles, part of Ronald Reagan's strategy was to plus up the military, and a big part of that strategy was to plus up the amount of nuclear weapons that we had available to us. Of course, the nuclear triad would be the missiles that are in their submarine fleet, and then you have the Air Force's bomber units that carry nuclear missiles and were on alert at the time. But we really didn't have any kind of field units that could deploy missiles quickly, except for the submarines. So he developed the ground launch cruise missile program to kind of fill in that gap so that we could have missile strikes deep into Russia within 20 minutes. I mean, you can pretty much hit any spot on the map with the ICBMs in 30 minutes. But we shortened that time down between 10 to 20 minutes with those intermediate missiles from the ground launch cruise missile systems. And a ground launch cruise missile system consists of 3 launchers. Each launcher has 4 missiles in it. And then there's a launch facility that goes out with it. It's kind of a big box that a couple of officers sit in. They have control keys, much like the missile silos out west there. And the whole thing with Glickum was to hide, because we didn't want the satellites to be able to know where those units were at. So hiding became the most important part about a Glickum unit, literally to the point where you would wrap duct tape around your hammers so that when you pounded stakes, they didn't make much noise, because we didn't want people to know we were there. We always convoyed out at night. We used NVGs. We didn't have headlights, so that the satellites couldn't track where we were traveling on which roads. When you got to the site, you literally did everything in the dark. And when the sun come up, it was always a magical moment to look out over the Glickum site and see nothing. Like, where is everybody? And all your movements, you know, it was as little movement as possible during the daylight hours. You had certain tracks that you took, and it was full camouflage the whole time. Your uniform, your face, you put duct tape over anything shiny on your gear. You put MRE boxes over your headlights so there would be no reflection off your Humvee headlights. Camouflage netting was over everything. And that was what it was all about, was just driving somewhere, setting up your ground launch cruise missile site, hiding really well. And our job was to protect those sites. We set up a exterior perimeter. We would dig defensive fighting positions, and we had sensors that we would put out in the middle of the night that we could track if people were trying to come near us, if vehicles were tracking near us. At that time, Spetsnaz, which was the Russian Special Forces unit, it's kind of equivalent to our Army Rangers. Spetsnaz was all about trying to find these Glick'em sites. They wanted to know where they're at so that they could, if need be, they could destroy them before the missiles were launched. So we oftentimes would have Spetsnaz incursions where they would try to sneak in and probe into where the Glick'em units were at. On Sicily, we didn't have as many as like, say, Belgium used to have them all the time. Sicily, not so much, and I'll tell you a good story about Sicily, see. So in 87, or it might have been 86, 87, General Dozier was kidnapped by the Red Brigade Army, which was a terrorist unit. And there were Red Brigade Army factions in Sicily at the time. Well, they got General Dozier back, and so Italian, right? Italy. What do you think of when you think of Italians? You think of the mafia, right? I mean, people think, oh yeah, the mafia, Italian, Sicily, right? So the air base there was really good for business. A lot of American money was being poured into there. And so the business people, the people that were controlling a lot of the business over there, were connected to the mafioso. And by the way, mafioso just means family. It's really more of a philosophy over there than it is having to deal with crime here. But the bottom line is, it is all about money. Okay, and the mafia wanted to make sure that their folks were getting plenty of the money that was being filtered in through the Americans that were assigned to the air base. So I said all that to say this: shortly after General Dozier's kidnap and release, all over Italy, Red Brigade Army people started showing up dead with bullets in their heads. And no one was talking much about it, but we're pretty sure that it was the mafia wanted to make things better so that more American money would pour in. And so we didn't have, because of that, they were ultra aware of, the Russians were ultra aware that they didn't want to be nosing around stuff because they could end up dead like a lot of the Red Brigade Army factions did. So we didn't have a lot of Spetsnaz incursions, occasionally, but not that many. So Glick'em was a lot of fun. You go out into the field for 6 to 9 days at a time. Then you'd come back to your home unit. You'd sort of regenerate, get some rest, and you'd get about 3 to 5 days off. And then you go back out again for 6 to 12 days more. And this cycle continued for the whole time that Glick'em was in operation. There was always 1 or 2 flights that were out and about somewhere on the island of Sicily. So, yeah, a lot of fun.
So tell me about Desert Storm.
Desert Storm. Okay, well, that 1990, I was actually I was at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, and we were in a field exercise. The Air Force is always practicing, and we were practicing our field craft duties. I was an aggressor that night, so we were at the aggressor camp, and we were listening to a little FM radio out there, and the news came across that Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. And I remember looking at Michael Jones, and I said, Mike, I guarantee you we're going to be there this week. He's like, nah, Kuwait is just a little country. No one cares about Kuwait. And I was like, I'm telling you, dude, we're going. And so we finished the exercise that day kind of quickly. It was a surprise because it was scheduled to go 2 days longer, but they ended the exercise index. And we went back to our units, and then we got recalled 8 hours later. As soon as we got recalled back. And during the recall, you bring your mobility bags with you, which is pretty much like, okay, there's the plane, get on it and go. And at that base, me, Mike Jones, and 7 others of us were on the advanced ADVON teams, advanced security teams. And our job was to literally get on a plane and go. And so we got this recall, and it was kind of odd because it was so soon right after we just had an exercise. So we realized pretty early on this isn't an exercise. So we had our mobility bags, we processed through the line, and got on what was that, KC-10. Got on a KC-10 and went to the Middle East. Our first stop was Dhahran, and it's in Saudi Arabia. And they said, no, you can't come here, you got to leave. Apparently all the status of forces agreements and all that stuff hadn't been completed yet for the missions that were getting ready to happen. And so we went to, where did we go after that? We went to Riyadh, and we camped out in Riyadh for a day, no, 2 days. And then we went to, where did we go to after that? I don't even remember. It was in Oman. I can't remember. Anyways, that's where we set up our main operating base at. And we, once the other security forces started backfilling, we went to our home unit, which ended up being at Al-Kharj. And so that was kind of an experience, because up to that point, all of our training was actually geared towards Europe. You know, the Cold War thing. We really hadn't done much desert warfare training at all. So when we got there, we're in woodland camouflage, and they're like, okay, well, we got to give you some desert camis and some Buster Brown boots, and they re-outfitted us. And after that, hung out there. The unit started flying in, and we were setting up air bases and providing security. We were there with joint forces from Britain, Australia. Al-Kharj was actually, we called it Al's Garage, because it was kind of like a collection of all these different military aircrafts from all these coalition forces from all over these different countries. We had Tornadoes and F-16s, F-15s, stealth fighters, all just a whole hodgepodge of different things, air refueling aircraft. And we were kind of stoked about it, because as opposed to being in a woodland environment or a jungle environment where you don't see the bad guys coming, we could see them for miles and miles and miles away. Just because it's a desert, it's pretty much flat and dusty, and there isn't a whole lot of things in the way. And that was fun, not really, but it was hot, man. Oh my God. You know, you would think that 70 degrees would sound pretty balmy, but when it's 120 degrees in the shade, and I'm not exaggerating about that, I mean literally 120 degrees in the shade, and then it drops to 70 at night. You know, you think about that temperature swing, and imagine if it was 70 degrees in Ohio and all of a sudden it dropped to 20 degrees. That's what it was like in the desert, and that was not much fun. A lot of flies in the desert, a lot of just nasty things there. Snakes, every time you lift up anything that was creating shade for something, a scorpion or a sand viper would crawl out. So we always carried snake shot in our 9mm with us, because we killed a lot of snakes. Yeah. So that was initially what it was like when we got there. Of course, once the General Schwarzkopf decided to go ahead and start the invasion, it didn't last long at all. And our guys, they would come into Al-Kharj, the units that were dropping bombs and shooting missiles, they would come in, and pretty much, the typical safety things that cause a deployment slowdown or an operations tempo slowdown. That sort of went out the window. I mean, literally guys were hand carrying AIM-7s while aircraft were still running and clipping them in and loading them in on the fly just so they could keep rotating. And I mean, aircraft just launched around the clock 24/7 for the whole course of those time periods. After that concluded, we got to do something different that I really hadn't done before, and that was deal with POWs that were being taken to holding places. They'd come to air bases, and then we would have to do a lot of POW work, keeping them safe and secure, and hadn't done that before. Stayed there until I think April. It was April when we finally got to come home, and it was pretty cool. Fresh in my mind were stories of Vietnam about all the guys and gals coming back from Vietnam and were really mistreated by the American public, called baby killers and all these horrible things. So that was on my mind. We really didn't know what to expect when we got back because, again, this is 1990. We didn't have the kind of communication systems that we have now where you can just pick up your phone and see what the local news feed is back home. It wasn't like that. We really didn't know what to expect. But I remember getting off the plane, and as far as I could see down the aisleway, excuse me. The aisleways were lined with people with signs, and they were cheering, and it was just really cool. Yeah.
And how long were you over there?
In Desert Storm,
Desert Storm, yeah.
we left August 15th, so it was about 4.5, 5 months, I think.
Tell me about Korea.
Korea, yeah. Korea was fun. I came back from Desert Storm, and little personal quip here. It happened to a lot of guys, and it happens still today. You're gone a lot, and you're not there taking care of your wife or girlfriend, and then they find another fella, and they run off them. So after Desert Storm, I discovered that my wife then had been fooling around with a fella, and so we divorced, and I went in and told my commander at that time, I said, "You got to get me out of here. I just can't be around this woman, or something bad could happen." And he said, I'll have you set of orders tomorrow, and it was to Osan, Korea. And he did. He had those orders on my desk the very next day. And I shipped out to Osan about 15 days later. It was a pretty fast turnaround for an actual PCS, permanent change of station. Got to Korea, didn't know what to expect. I'd never been to the Far East before. It was my first adventure there. Got off the plane in Seoul, and then they drove us out to Osan. I remember driving through the countryside, and the smell was really, it smelled terrible. And I was like, what is that smell? And the driver of the vehicle said that it was the rice paddies. And I'm like, okay, well, I never smelled rice. It smelled quite like that. And as it turns out, they use raw sewage to fertilize the rice fields. So that's the smell that was coming off of the rice fields. Yeah, I had a good time. I was a training instructor for most of my time there. Every year, in fact, I think it still happens. Full Eagle is the name of the exercise, and every year North Korea gets in a big, gets their panties in a bunch about it because it's a joint services exercise. All the military units from all the different services play in that, and it's a huge exercise. So I got to be the supply S4 for an entire sector of Osan Air Base, and with all the Korean ROK units and all the other military units that were interlaced with our own security folks. There was probably about 1,500 people that I got to make sure that they were all fed and bedded and had all the equipment they needed to do their jobs for the exercise. That was a lot of work. And you know, wherever I go, it seems like there's always some critter somewhere that gets me, you know, and I can tell you stories. Even in Honduras, I got stung by a scorpion and got infected. It was a mess. But in Korea, what it was it was a mite that lives on the rats. Now, remember, I was the S4, so one of my jobs prior to the exercise was to clean out the DFPs, which had been sometimes littered from years before. They had just reused these same DFPs. And rats lived in those things. And so getting in there and cleaning those out, you'd run into rats all the time. Well, I didn't know this, but there's these little mites that live on the rats that can give you a sickness if they bite you called scrub typhus, which is a form of typhoid fever. And it's very rare. Very few Americans ever get scrub typhus. Sometimes the canines will get it, but the canines have a sort of an immunity to it. And I remember feeling sick and going to the base hospital, and they said, "Oh, you just have a virus. You have they call it the Korean crud, you know, and so you just have a virus. Go home, rest, you'll be all right." And it got worse and worse and worse, and I was throwing up, and I had a fever, and it was muscle aches and pains, and I had this rash that started where these bites by my armpit were, and it sort of ran across my chest, and oh God, I felt horrible. And I went back to the base hospital. My roommate next door at the time, Al Navarro, he said, "Dude, you gotta go to the hospital. You look like you're about ready to die." So I did. And the doc's like, "Wow, this is pretty serious." They put me on antibiotics, and I went back to the dorm and rested. And all of a sudden, just like that, I just felt better. I thought, wow, these antibiotics are awesome. And at the hospital, the second time I went through, they had drawn blood and sent it out for some tests. So anyways, but I felt better. And on my third night of work, I get a call, and they said, "Put your supervisor on," because I worked in the control center, kind of like a dispatch center. And "Put your boss in there." He said, He said, "Babe, give me your gun." And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Because the only time you surrender your gun, you sidearm somebody, is either A, when you're getting ready to go to jail because you did something bad, or B, someone in your family has died and you're getting ready to go on emergency leave and they don't want you to have a gun to do anything terrible to yourself. So I got really in a panic. He said, "No, just relax. You got to go to the base hospital. The doc wants to talk to you over there." I'm like, all right. So I go to the base hospital, and he sits me down at the table, and he puts this book in front of me. He says, "Read that right there." I'm like, okay, typhoid fever, type A. And I'm reading it. He goes, no, over here. Like a little paragraph on scrub typhus, and it's a listing of all the symptoms I'd had. And then at the bottom, the paragraph talked about how there's a remission period for scrub typhus B, the B derivative. I'm not a medical guy, so I don't know what that meant. But anyways, what happens after this remission period is paralysis and death. So I'm in this remission period of this scrub typhus thing thinking, okay, you're telling me I'm getting ready to die. This is not a good thing. I certainly didn't think I was going to be taken out by a mite that lives on a rat. Especially, before that, I'd been in so many other awful things where I could have died. And I'm like, I'm going to take it by a mite I couldn't even see that bit me. You kidding me? So he said, no, relax. We got a different kind of antibiotic we're going to put you on. You're going to be on it for 30 days. It's a tetracycline, something or another. And I was like, okay. So they fixed me up, and I was better after that. And my acne cleared up too. I don't know what that had to do with anything, but Korea was, I went through that. Got to do the S4 thing, and got to be an instructor over there. That was a good time. I enjoyed training people, and I still do it to this day. So.
So tell me about the convoy. You said Oman, was it, or?
Well, convoys were just a way we move things around in the desert. Air bases were primary hubs for not only fighter aircraft to take off and reconnaissance aircraft, but also just for supplies to supply. People got to eat. Their canteens wear out, their backpacks get tore. They need bullets, they need grenades, they need all of these things that you would need to live in a foreign field environment. So as these supplies would come in on aircraft, C-130, C-141, C-5, C-17. Well, we didn't have C-17s then, but these big aircraft would just unload pallets and pallets and pallets of stuff. And then our transportation folks would sort it out and decide where it needed to go. And then we would get a tasking order from our command section, which would say, okay, you got to put together a team to go out. You're going to be convoying so many pounds of whatever to wherever unit you were going to. They'd give you a map. You'd have to do a operations order for the mission, and each convoy was a mission of its own. You would, if you were the guy doing the op order, you usually had an officer that was putting together the main op order, usually lieutenant, first or second lieutenant, sometimes a captain. They'd be the convoy commander, and then, of course, at that time, I was E7 by then, because this was after, this would have been enduring freedom after the towers fell. I'd be the NCOIC in charge of my convoy, and then I'd select people for my team, and then we would put them in the convoy wherever they needed to go. If it was, if they were the point or the lead team, they'd go out ahead of the convoy and they'd sort of sweep the route looking for IEDs, bad guys. And then you'd have a lead vehicle in the convoy, and then you'd have another security vehicle interspersed somewhere in the middle, and then you'd have a rear security person. Each one of those were four-man fire teams, so you had anywhere from 12 to 16 security forces people that were protecting the convoy wherever it needed to go. Prior to that, we would talk to our intelligence folks and see what they knew about the routes we were taking, see if there were any choke points along the way, places where bad guys can sort of box you in, ambush points, things like that. And there were plenty over there. I was fortunate. None of my convoys were ever stopped. We saw action a lot of times. But again, our ability to reach out and touch somebody with our heavy weapons was much better than theirs. They pretty much had small arms. Occasionally, you'd run into somebody that had an old rocket from the Soviet Union that they'd try to shoot your way. Most of them couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, but they tried. Half the times they wouldn't even detonate. They'd shoot a rocket and it would go 10 feet and not detonate. You're like, oh, that didn't work out too good for you, did it? So there was a lot involved with convoys, and they happen all over the Middle East all the time. A lot of security forces units, that's their primary function is, of course, to protect the air base, but their secondary function is to protect convoys that are leaving the air bases, going to different places. I was fortunate. Nothing really bad ever happened to me. The fellow that actually took my spot when I rotated out, our expeditionary force rotated out and the second one came in, was a good friend of mine, Jimmy Clements. And Jimmy wasn't so lucky. He had his leg blown off. Um, so those kind of things, that's just part of warfare, and it's the kind of world we live in now. It's not all about nuclear missiles and some nebulous thing that's far away or some political power that's telling you to do this or do that. And now it's a lot more close to home. Now you have to worry about the bad guys walking into your school or walking into your church, or it's a lot more in your face now than it used to be back then. So that's what I can tell you about convoys.
Coming home from that, was that similar to Desert Storm? Or?
No, not so much. I mean, the American public at this time had gotten pretty used to the whole military machine. They'd been blasted with it on the nightly news. CNN played it around the clock during Desert Storm, and 9/11, it was pretty much expected that we were going to do this. You also had in between all that the confrontation that was happening in the Balkans at that time, Mogadishu. There was just a lot of stuff going on all over the world. So the military was constantly doing something, and the public just kind of got used to it, I think. And I believe in a lot of ways that's where they're at today. They're just so used to Americans being involved in some conflict somewhere that it's almost become kind of passé, like, oh yeah. Not that they don't support military people. I think that the support that American public shows military folks now is a lot better than, say, during the Vietnam eras. And I routinely have people that will walk up to me and shake my hand and say, thanks for your service. They might see me wearing an Air Force t-shirt or something. And so that's nice, and I'm glad that the American public appreciates that. But they don't really gather in large numbers like, to greet troops coming back, because we don't deploy that way anymore. It's not like a big operation. Now it's become kind of a status quo. The military has developed these air expeditionary forces to a level where you can almost plan where you're going, when you're going, and what you need to take with you. I will say that there are a lot of cool things out there to recognize vets. This is one of them. This is pretty neat, and I appreciate you asking me to come do this, Jeremy. That was really nice of you. There's the honor flights. If you've never been to one of those, they have them. They'll be starting up here in the late spring, and they have them in the late fall. But what they do is they gather up these vets from Korean War, World War II, Vietnam era, even some Desert Storm vets and stuff, and they'll put on an airplane and they send them to Washington, D.C., and they wine them and dine them, and they treat them like rock stars there. It's really cool. And then they come back from that, and they land at Dayton International Airport. And ours is just one. There's a lot of these honor flights that go on all over the country, but they'll come back to Dayton International Airport, and Pat will send the band out there to play the different military service songs, and so when the vets get off the plane, they've got literally the chorusways are kind of like when I came back from Desert Storm, just lined with people with signs and Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts and service dogs, and just so much support from different people in the community, not just military folks, but in general. And they clap as some of them are in wheelchairs being pushed down the courseways, and some are walking, and a lot of them are old, and they've had a long day because it starts at like 4 o'clock in the morning for them, and they've been in D.C. all day, and then they fly back, and now it's 10 o'clock at night, right? So they're all pretty tired by that point, but then they see all that happening, and the whole airport's just full of people just clapping and cheering, and it kind of makes up a little bit, I think, especially for the Vietnam guys, on how maybe they were treated when they came home. And those guys, just tears rolling down their face, they're just really, really stoked about it. And I think it's a high point in their life. And they realize suddenly, like, man, people still appreciate what I did back then, And I think that's important. So those kind of things happen all all over the country. There's a lot of veterans groups out there that love and support veterans, and yeah.
What's your proudest moment of your military service?
Oh wow, I had a lot of them. Gosh, I got to meet presidents. Got to proudest moment. So many good things, so many things to be proud of, I guess. I think probably my proudest moment would have been when the commander walked in and said, I need a guy to be in charge of General Jumper's security staff, and you're the best guy in this unit that we got, and I want you to take it over. Now, the other part of that is that I was a technical sergeant at the time. I was an E6, and that duty was usually reserved for higher ranking folks, E7s that were trying to buck for their next promotion. And it was a big stepping stone. So to be asked above all those people was like, wow, really, me? So that was a proud moment. I was really excited about that. Scared to death, but I was pretty excited, so yeah.
What message would you leave for future generations that might be viewing this interview? Well, military service is always going to be good. If you're a young person, I definitely recommend it for you. If you can qualify and you can do an enlistment, or even if you want to do a commission as an officer, you should. For several reasons. A lot of them are self-serving. If you're an enlisted person, the military is very strong towards making sure that you get money for education. They're going to send you to a school, they're going to teach you a trade, and it's going to, if you're a young person, it's going to help define you, your character. It's going to help you mature a lot quicker than your counterparts. And it's going to set you up in a way that's going to help you the rest of your life. So that's my recruiting spiel, and I really mean that. I bought my nephew Noah. He drove all the way down from Michigan, and my sister brought him down, and he said, Larry, he's thinking about going in the Army. I would really like you to talk to him about the Air Force. I said, well, let's take him out to the base and let him talk to airmen that are working right now. So we did. We just wandered around and met young people, and they took him aside and told him what the Air Force was like, and that was a very positive thing for him. I'm pretty sure he's going to join the military. I'm still not sure it's the Air Force. I hope it is, but it's a good thing for young people. Wars are always going to happen. There's always going to be bad people that want to take what you got. And I don't care if you're talking about a crackhead in West Dayton, the scammer that's calling you from Jamaica on the telephone trying to tell you that you need to send him money. I don't care if it's the prince that wants to leave you $1 million, whatever the latest internet scams are. There's always going to be bad people in the world. And know that, but also know that there's always good people out there that are fighting against that. There's always someone out there that's on another level that's looking out for your best interest, even if you've never met them, even if you don't know them. There's people out there that are taking care of business to keep you safe every day. And a lot of them wear Army fatigues, Air Force fatigues, Navy uniforms, Marine Corps uniforms, in all different walks of life, Coast Guard. Those folks are doing it every day. And I think that will continue for many, many years to come, because there'll always be bad people out there. But there's always going to be good people too, so. Rob, do you have anything? Is there anything that you'd like to add that we didn't cover?
No, because you can't edit it out, but I'd say something really silly and funny, but I won't say that, so.
Sure?
I'm sure, but thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Larry. Thank you for your service. Really appreciate it. And yeah, that concludes the interview of Larry Bade. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Great.